Chapter 1. The singular summons. In the summer of 1895. London lay under a stifling canopy of heat, the air thick with the mingled scents of dust, tar, and the faint pervasive reek of the Thames. Our lodgings at 221 B Baker Street, though comfortably familiar, felt oppressive in the unrelenting warmth, and I found myself languishing in an armchair, my medical practice temporarily quiet, my thoughts drifting to the peculiar adventures that had so often drawn me from the routine of civilian life. Sherlock Holmes, my friend and companion, was immune to such torpor. His lean figure was bent over a cluttered table in the corner, where a retort bubbled gently over a spirit lamp, emitting a sharp, acrid odor that mingled oddly with the scent of his strong shag tobacco. He was engrossed in an experiment, his long fingers manipulating a pipette with the precision of a violinist. His keen grey eyes fixed on a strip of linen stained with some curious brownish mark. The purpose of his investigation, as was often the case, remained a mystery to me, but I had learned not to interrupt when his mind was so fiercely engaged. It was on one such morning, as the city sweltered and the drone of flies filled the room, that our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, appeared at the door, her face flushed from the heat and her manner betraying a touch of agitation. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "there's a gentleman from Scotland Yard to see you. Inspector Hopkins. He says his name is—" Holmes's head snapped up, the pipette pausing mid-air. "Hopkins, you say? A promising young man, Watson, with a sharper mind than most at the Yard. Show him up, Mrs. Hudson, and let us see what brings him here." Moments later, Inspector Stanley Hopkins entered, a tall, wiry figure in his early 30s, his face pale but resolute, his dark eyes alight with a mixture of determination and unease. He carried his hat in one hand, and his brow glistened with perspiration, though whether from the heat or the urgency of his errand, I could not tell. Holmes gestured to a chair, but Hopkins remained standing, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began, his voice clipped with the urgency of a man pressed by time. "I come to you with a case that defies all my experience. It is a matter of murder, sir, and a most brutal one, committed in Forest Row, near Lewisham. The victim is a man named Captain Peter Carey, a retired weigher of some notoriety. The circumstances are so extraordinary that I confess myself at a loss. I need your help." Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him, his eyes narrowing with that familiar spark of interest that signaled the awakening of his remarkable faculties. "A murder, you say, and extraordinary circumstances. Pray, Inspector, spare no detail. Begin at the beginning, and let us have the facts in their proper order." Hopkins drew a deep breath, as if to steady himself, and launched into his narrative. Captain Peter Carey, known to some as Black Peter on account of his dark complexion and formidable presence, was found dead yesterday morning in a small outbuilding on his property, a place he called his cabin. He was a man of about 50, powerfully built, with a reputation for a fierce temper and a solitary disposition. The cause of death is unmistakable. He was impaled through the chest with a harpoon, driven with such force that the point emerged from his back. The scene suggests a violent struggle, yet we have no clear suspect, no motive that holds water, and no witnesses to speak of. The local police are baffled, and I admit I am little better off. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a sudden intensity. "A harpoon, you say? A weapon not commonly found in suburban gardens. This is no ordinary crime, Hopkins. Tell me more of this Captain Carey and the circumstances of his death." Hopkins nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket and glancing at it as he spoke. Carey was a widower, living alone at Woodman's Lee, a modest estate on the edge of Forest Row. His wife passed some years ago, and his only daughter, now married, resides in Bristol. He was rarely seen in the village, preferring to keep to himself in this cabina curia structure, fitted out like a ship's quarters, with nautical instruments and relics of his whaling days. The locals say he was a hard man, given to drink and prone to quarrels, though none could name a specific enemy. He was found early yesterday by his gardener, a man named Slater, who alerted the village constable, and the scene itself. Holmes pressed, his voice sharp with curiosity. Describe it precisely. Hopkins hesitated, as if the memory unsettled him. The cabin is a single room, perhaps 12 feet square, with a low ceiling and a single window facing the garden. Carey was lying on his back near the center of the room, the harpoon pinning him to the floor. Blood had pooled beneath him, staining the wooden boards. A chair was overturned, and a table bore signs of disturbance. A bottle of rum, half empty, and a tobacco pouch had been knocked to the floor. The window showed marks of being forced, suggesting entry from outside, but the ground beyond is dry and hard, and we found no footprints. A notebook, possibly Carey's, was found on the table, but its contents are cryptic initials, dates, and figures that make little sense to us. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. The harpoon describe. Was it part of the cabin's decor, or brought by the killer? It was one of Carey's own, Hopkins replied. He had several such weapons mounted on the wall's relics from his time on the whaling ships. The one used was a heavy, barbed harpoon, the kind used for hunting whales. It would require great strength to wield it so. Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. Strength, yes, and skill. A harpoon is not a weapon one picks up lightly. This suggests a man familiar with the sea, perhaps a sailor from Carey's past. And the notebook, did you bring it, or a copy? Hopkins shook his head. I have photographs of the pages, which I can have sent you. The original remains at the yard for safekeeping. Excellent, Holmes said, rising abruptly. Watson, pack a bag. We shall take the next train to Forest Row. Inspector, you will accompany us, and we shall examine this cabin for ourselves. The harpoon, the notebook, the forced window. These are threads in a tapestry, and I mean to unravel it. I confess, I felt a thrill at the prospect of a new adventure, for the monotony of that sweltering summer had begun to weigh upon me. Within the hour, we were aboard a train rattling through the green suburbs of London, bound for Lewisham. Holmes sat in silence, his eyes half closed, his mind no doubt racing through the possibilities presented by Hopkins's account. I, too, pondered the case, struck by the savagery of the crime and the oddity of its execution. A harpoon, of all things, it spoke of a world far removed from the orderly streets of London, a world of salt and storm, of men hardened by the sea's unforgiving embrace. Forest Row was a quiet village, its lanes lined with hedgerows and its cottages drowsing. In the midday heat, Woodman's Lee, Carey's estate, stood at the village's edge, a rambling house of weathered bricks surrounded by overgrown gardens. Beyond the house, a short path led to the cabin, a sturdy wooden structure that seemed out of place amid the pastoral calm. Its exterior was rough-hewn, its single chimney puffing no smoke, and its small window glinted dully in the sunlight. As we approached, Hopkins led us to the door, which was guarded by a local constable, a stout man with a nervous air. "No one's touched the place since yesterday, sir," he said, saluting Hopkins. "All's as it was." Holmes nodded, his eyes already scanning the ground. He crouched near the door, examining the earth with a magnifying glass, his movements precise and deliberate. "Curious," he murmured. "The soil here has been disturbed, as if something were buried or unearthed. Yet the ground is too hard for clear impressions." Inside, the cabin was a grim tableau. The air was heavy with the coppery temps of blood and the faint sweetness of rum. Captain Carey lay as Hopkins had described, a giant of a man, his dark beard matted with blood, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The harpoon, a cruel instrument of iron and wood, transfixed him, its barbed head buried in the floor beneath. The room itself was a shrine to the sea. A sextant gleamed on a shelf. A barometer hung on the wall, and a row of harpoons, now one short-lined the far wall like silent sentinels. A table bore the marks of a struggle, its surface scratched. The rum bottle and tobacco pouch lying haphazardly beside the notebook. Hopkins had mentioned, Holmes moved with the intensity of a hound on the scent, his long fingers probing every detail. He examined the harpoon, noting its weight and balance. "This was no casual strike," he said. "The angle suggests it was thrown from a distance, perhaps from the doorway. The force required would be considerable, and the aim precise." He turned to the window, its frame splintered where it had been forced. "The entry point, as you said, Inspector, yet the absence of footprints outside is troubling. A man strong enough to wield this weapon would leave some trace, unless he took great care to avoid it." Hopkins shifted uncomfortably. "We thought perhaps he approached from the path, where the ground is firmer." "Perhaps," Holmes said, his tone skeptical. He picked up the tobacco pouch, sniffing its contents. Strong navy tobacco, the kind favored by sailors. And this rum cheap, but potent. Carey was not a man of refined tastes. The notebook drew his attention next. Its pages were filled with scrawled entries, a jumble of initials, dates, and sums. J.H., 1883, £200. R.M., 1884, £150. T.N.C., 1885, pound 100. The handwriting was rough, as if written in haste or under the influence of drink. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he studied it. "These are not mere accounts," he said. "They suggest transactions, perhaps payments for services rendered or silence bought. Carey was involved in something unsavory, I wager." Hopkins nodded. "We know little of his past, save that he captained a whaling ship, the Sea Unicorn, for many years. There are rumors of disputes with his crew, but nothing concrete." "The sea leaves its mark," Holmes said, almost to himself. "This harpoon is more than a weapon. It is a message. Someone from Carey's past sought him out, and their grievance was mortal." "We spent the better part of an hour in the cabin," Holmes, moving from one detail to another, his mind weaving connections I could only dimly perceive. He examined the overturned chair, noting its broken leg, and studied the bloodstains, measuring their spread. At length, he stepped outside, circling the cabin with his glass, pausing again at the disturbed patch of earth. "Something was here," he said, digging gently with a stick. "But it has been removed. We shall need to watch this place." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garden, Holmes turned to Hopkins. "Inspector, I shall require those photographs of the notebook at once, and keep a man posted here tonight. Our killer may return." We returned to the village, in a quaint establishment called the Green Man, where we took rooms for the night. Over a simple dinner of cold meat and bread, Holmes was unusually talkative, his mind alight with the case. "This is no common murder, Watson," he said, his eyes gleaming. "The Harpoon, the nautical setting, the cryptic notebook all point to a drama rooted in the sea. Carey was a man with enemies, and one of them has struck with a vengeance." I ventured a question. "Do you suspect a sailor then? Someone from his whaling days?" "Almost certainly," Holmes replied. "The harpoon is not a weapon of convenience. It is a tool of expertise. Our man is strong, skilled, and driven by a motive that has festered for years. The notebook may hold the Kethos initials, and some suggest a pattern of deceit or extortion. We must learn more of Carey's voyages on the Sea Unicorn." As night fell, I retired to my room, my mind buzzing with the day's events. The image of Black Peter, pinned to the floor like some monstrous trophy, lingered in my thoughts, as did Holmes's certainty that the sea held the secret to his death. I knew, from long experience, that my friend's instincts were rarely wrong, and I felt a stirring of anticipation for what the morrow might reveal. The next morning, as we breakfasted, a telegram arrived from London. It was from Hopkins, informing us that a young man had been seen loitering near Woodman's Lee the previous evening, a stranger to the village. His description: tall, pale, with a nervous demeanor, intrigued Holmes. "This may be our first thread," he said, folding the telegram. "We shall return to the scene at once." Thus began our deeper descent into the mystery of Black Peter, a case that would lead us through the shadows of a seafarer's past, where vengeance and greed intertwined, like the coils of a ship's rope. But that, as I shall relate, is a tale for another chapter. Chapter 2. The cabin in the garden. The train from London to Forest Row rattled through the verdant countryside, its rhythm a counterpoint to the restless energy that had seized Sherlock Holmes since Inspector Hopkins's visit. The summer sun beat down relentlessly, casting sharp shadows across the fields, and the air in our carriage was close and heavy, though Holmes seemed oblivious to the discomfort. His lean frame was taut with anticipation, his sharp eyes fixed on some unseen horizon, as he murmured fragments of thought, piecing together the puzzle of Captain Peter Carey's brutal end. I, too, felt the stir of excitement, for the savagery of a harpoon murder and the nautical echoes of the crime promised a mystery unlike any we had encountered in recent months. We arrived at Forest Row shortly after noon, the village drowsing. In the heat, its lanes quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a cart or the distant bark of a dog. Woodman's Lee, Carey's estate, lay a short walk from the station, its weathered brick house half hidden behind a tangle of overgrown laurels and untrimmed hedges. The grounds had an air of neglect, as if their owner had cared little for appearances, and I could not help but wonder what manner of man this Black Peter had been. To live so apart from the world, the cabin, as Hopkins had called it, stood at the rear of the property, a stout wooden structure that seemed to belong more to a wharfside than a suburban garden. Its planks were weathered to a silvery grey, and its low sloping roof was crowned with a small chimney, now cold. A single window faced the garden path, its glass dulled by dust, and the door, heavy and iron-bound, bore the marks of frequent use. As we approached, a local constable, a burly man with a sunburned face, saluted Hopkins and stepped aside, his eyes flickering with unease. "No one's been inside since you left, sir," he said to Hopkins. "I've kept watch, as you ordered." Holmes nodded absently, his attention already fixed on the ground before the cabin. He crouched, his magnifying glass glinting as he studied the earth, which was dry and compacted from the summer's drought. "This path is well trodden," he observed, "but there are no fresh marks of note. The killer was careful, or else he knew the ground's hardness would betray no trace." He rose and turned to the door, examining its lock and hinges with a critical eye. "No signs of tampering here," he said. "The window, then, as you mentioned, Inspector." Hopkins led us to the side of the cabin, where the window's frame bore clear marks of being forced a splintered sill, and a bent latch suggested a pry bar or similar tool. Holmes leaned close, his glass moving slowly over the wood. "Damage is recent," he said, "but curiously superficial. A determined man could have broken through with less effort. This suggests haste, or perhaps a desire to make the intrusion appear more violent than it was." We entered the cabin, and I was struck at once by its oppressive atmosphere. The air was thick with the mingled scents of blood, stale tobacco, and the faint, briny tank of the sea. The room was small, no more than 12 feet square, its low ceiling stained with smoke. The walls were adorned with relics of a seafarer's life. A brass sextant gleamed dully on a shelf. A barometer hung beside a faded chart of the Arctic seas, and a row of Harpoon's 5, I noted, where 6 might have been lined the far wall, their barbed tips catching the light. A sturdy table stood near the center, its surface scarred and littered with a half-empty bottle of rum, a leather tobacco pouch, and a small, well-worn notebook. A single chair lay overturned, its back splintered as if struck with force. At the room's heart lay Captain Peter Carey, a giant of a man, even in death. His broad frame sprawled across the floor, his dark beard matted with blood, his eyes fixed in a stare of frozen defiance. The harpoon that had ended his life was a cruel instrument, its iron shaft driven through his chest with such force that its barbed head had embedded itself in the wooden floor beneath. Blood had pooled around him, dark and viscous, and the sight was one to chill the stoutest heart. Holmes moved with his characteristic precision, his eyes darting from one detail to another. He knelt beside the body, studying the harpoon's angle and the spread of the blood. The blow was delivered with extraordinary power, he said, his voice low. The weapon entered just below the sternum, piercing the heart. Death would have been near instantaneous, yet the overturned chair suggests a struggle beforehand. Curious, he rose and examined the harpoon itself, gripping its wooden shaft and testing its weight. "This is no toy," he said. "It is a weapon designed for whales, not men. To wield it so requires not only strength, but skill, harpooner skill honed by years at sea." I glanced at the row of harpoons on the wall. "It came from here, then?" I asked. Holmes nodded. "One is missing from the set. The killer used what was at hand, which suggests either opportunity or familiarity with the cabin. But why a harpoon? A knife or pistol would have been simpler. This choice speaks of intent, of a message delivered in blood." Hopkins, who had been watching Holmes with a mixture of awe and impatience, gestured to the window. "The forced entry suggests an outsider," he said. "Yet the absence of footprints outside is puzzling. We searched the garden thoroughly and found nothing." Holmes crossed to the window, his glass once more in hand. He studied the splintered frame, then leaned out to examine the ground below. "The earth here is as hard as the path," he said. "But look there, in the flowerbed." He pointed to a patch of soil some yards away, where the petals of a rose bush lay crushed and the earth appeared disturbed. "Something heavy passed through here, though the marks are indistinct." shall return to this." He turned back to the room, his attention now on the table. The rum bottle was unstoppered, its contents sloshing gently as he lifted it. "Cheap spirits, the kind favored by sailors," he said, sniffing the rim. Carey drank alone, it seems, or else his guest declined to share. The tobacco pouch, embossed with the initials PC, contained a coarse blend, its scent sharp and pungent. Holmes sifted through it, his fingers deft, but found nothing hidden within. The notebook was his next focus. Its pages were filled with a rough, uneven scrawl, the ink smudged in places as if written by a hand unsteady with drink or haste. Holmes read aloud a few entries. J.H., 1883, £200. R.M., 1884, £150. T.C., 1885, £100. The list continued. A litany of initials, dates, and sums, some as recent as the past year. "These are not mere accounts," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "They suggest payments, perhaps for services rendered or for silence." Carey was no saint, it seems. I ventured a thought. Could these be debts from his whaling days? Payments to crewmen, perhaps. Holmes shook his head. Unlikely. The sums are too large for wages, and the irregularity of the entries suggests something clandestine, extortion perhaps, or a share of illicit profit. We must learn more of Carey's voyages. Hopkins provided what details he could. Carey captained the Sea Unicorn, a whaler out of Dundee, for nearly 20 years. He retired a decade ago, wealthy by some accounts, though none knew the source of his fortune. He was a hard man, feared by his crew, and there are tales of quarrels and violence at sea, though nothing was ever proven. Since settling here, he kept to himself, save for occasional trips to London or the coast. Holmes's gaze returned to the harpoon. "The sea follows him even in death," he said. "This weapon is a relic of his past, and I wager his killer is, too. A man who can throw a harpoon with such precision is no stranger to the weighers." Craft. We spent some time longer in the cabin, Holmes moving from one detail to another with the intensity of a bloodhound. He examined the overturned chair, noting the angle of its broken back, and studied the bloodstains, measuring their spread with a tape. He lingered over the harpoons on the wall, testing their balance, and returned to the notebook, photographing its pages with a small camera he carried for such purposes. At length, he stepped outside, circling the cabin with his glass, pausing again at the disturbed flowerbed. "This is no random trampling," he said, kneeling to inspect the soil. "Something was buried here, or unearthed, and recently. The earth is looser than the surrounding ground, though no clear shape emerges." He probed with a stick, but found nothing, and I saw a flicker of frustration cross his face as the afternoon waned. We returned to the garden path, where Holmes paused to survey the scene. "This cabin was Carey's sanctuary," he said, "a place where he could live as he did at sea. Yet it became his tomb. The killer knew this place, Watson, and knew Carey's habits. We are dealing with a man of purpose, driven by a grudge that has simmered for years." Hopkins, who had been silent for some time, spoke up. "What next, Mr. Holmes? The village is small, and no one reports seeing a stranger that night." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then we shall make inquiries of our own. The killer may have come and gone unseen, but he left traces here, in the cabin, and perhaps in Carey's past. I shall require those photographs of the notebook, Inspector, and any records you can obtain of the Sea Unicorn's voyages. Watson, we shall remain in Forest Road tonight. I have a feeling this case will not yield its secrets easily. We made our way to the Green Man, the village inn, where we secured rooms for the night. As we dined, Holmes was unusually silent, his mind no doubt sifting through the details we had uncovered. The image of Black Peter, impaled in his nautical lair, haunted me, as did the sense that we stood on the edge of a deeper mystery, one rooted in the tempests of a seafarer's life. What had Carey done to invite such vengeance? And who, from the vast and shadowy reaches of his past, had wielded the harpoon that brought him low? These questions lingered as I retired, the first threads of a tapestry that Holmes, I knew, would soon unravel. Chapter 3. The Shadow of the Seether. Morning after our examination of Captain Peter Carey's grim cabin dawned as oppressively warm as the day before, the air heavy with the promise of another sultry day in Forest Row. Sherlock Holmes, however, was undeterred by the heat, his mind as sharp and restless as ever. Over a simple breakfast at the Green Man, he sat with a cup of black coffee, his eyes fixed on the photographs of Carey's notebook that Inspector Hopkins had sent by courier from Scotland Yard. The images, though grainy, captured the scrawled entries clearly enough, and Holmes studied them with the intensity of a scholar deciphering an ancient text. I too peered over his shoulder, but the cryptic jumble of initials, dates, and sums offered me no insight, only a growing sense of the dark undercurrents that had led to Carey's violent end. These entries are the key. Watson, Holmes said at length, tapping the photographs with a lean finger. They are not random. Each set of initials, each sum, points to a transaction, and I suspect a sinister one. Carey was no mere weigher. He was a man who profited from secrets, and one of those secrets has returned to claim him. I ventured a question. Do you think these are payments for blackmail? Or perhaps shares in some illicit venture? Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. Both are possible, but the pattern suggests coercion. The sums are irregular, the dates sporadic, spanning years from his time on the Sea Unicorn. We must learn more of that ship and its voyages. Carey's past is the sea, and the sea, Watson, is a vast and unforgiving keeper of grudges. Our plan for the day was clear. We would return to Woodman's Lee to search the grounds more thoroughly, and Holmes intended to question the gardener, Slater, who had discovered Carey's body. The man who finds a corpse is often the first thread in the weave, Holmes remarked as we set out, his stride purposeful despite the oppressive heat. The path to Woodman's Lee was quiet, the village still half asleep under the weight of the summer sun. As we approached the estate, the cabin came into view, its weathered planks stark against the green of the garden. The constable from the previous day had been relieved by another, a younger man with a nervous air, who reported no disturbances. Overnight, Holmes dismissed him with a nod and turned his attention to the grounds, his magnifying glass already in hand. We began at the disturbed flowerbed near the cabin's window, where Holmes had noted the trampled roses the day before. He knelt, his glass moving slowly over the soil, which was looser than the surrounding earth, as if recently turned. "This is no mere footprint," he said, probing gently with a stick. "Something was buried here, or perhaps dug up within the last few days. The absence of clear marks suggests care, but not enough to erase all traces." He dug deeper, his movements precise, but the soil yielded nothing, no object, no clue, only the faint impression of something heavy having rested there. Holmes's brow furrowed, a rare sign of frustration. The killer took pains to cover his tracks, but this patch of earth tells a story. We shall return to it, Watson. We circled the cabin, Holmes examining every inch of the ground, from the hard-packed path to the overgrown shrubs that fringed the property. He paused at a low hedge near the garden's edge, where a single branch was snapped, its leaves wilted. "A man passed through here," he said, pointing to the faint scuff of a boot in the dirt. "Not recent enough to be our killer's exit, but it suggests someone has been watching the cabin. We are not alone in our interest." Our next task was to find Slater, the gardener. Hopkins had arranged for him to meet us at the house, and we found him waiting by the front door. A wiry man of middle age, with weathered hands and a face lined by years of outdoor toil. His eyes were wary, and he shifted uncomfortably as Holmes approached, his manner direct yet disarming. "Good morning, Mr. Slater," Holmes said, his tone cordial. "You were the first to find Captain Carey, I understand. Tell me exactly what you saw, and leave nothing out." Slater cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady. "It was early, sir, just after dawn. I come by most mornings to tend the grounds, though the captain didn't care much for flowers or neatness. I noticed the cabin door ajar, which wasn't usual. He kept it locked, always. I called out, got no answer, and went in. That's when I saw him, lying there with that harpoon through him. I didn't touch nothing, just ran for the constable." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The door was ajar, you say? Not forced?" "No, sir, not that I could tell. Just open, like someone forgot to shut it, and the window." Holmes pressed. "Did you notice its current? You tell me about it," I asked, my curiosity piqued. Slater hesitated, then nodded. "The window was broke, sir. Splinters on the sill, like someone pried it open." Holmes paced a few steps, his hands clasped behind his back. "Did you ever see Captain Carey with visitors? Men from his sailing days, perhaps?" Slater scratched his chin. He kept to himself, mostly. Didn't like company. But I saw a man or two over the years, rough types, like sailors. Never spoke to 'em, though. They'd come late, stay a spell in the cabin, then leave. The captain was always in a foul mood after." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, his eyes alight with interest. "Describe these men, if you can." Slater shrugged. "Hard to say, sir. One was tall, broad, with a scar on his cheek. Another was younger, pale-like, nervous. Didn't see 'em clear, but they weren't locals." Holmes thanked Slater and dismissed him, his mind clearly racing. "To visitors," he murmured. "One a sailor, perhaps, given the scar and build. The other, nervous, possibly a man with something to hide. This aligns with our notebook, Watson. Carey was entangled with dangerous men." We returned to the cabin, where Holmes insisted on a second inspection. He moved with renewed purpose, re-examining the harpoons on the wall, their iron tips gleaming dully. "These are not mere trophies," he said. "They are tools of a trade, and our killer knew that trade well. The angle of the wound suggests a throw from the doorway, a feat requiring practice and strength. A weigher, Watson, or someone trained." By one he paused at the table, lifting the rum bottle again. This was Kara's drink of choice, but was it shared? The absence of a second glass is telling, yet the bottle's level suggests more than one man's thirst. He sniffed the tobacco pouch once more, his expression thoughtful. Navy tobacco, strong and coarse, the kind a man like Carey would favor, but also common among sailors. "We are circling closer, Watson, but the net is not yet drawn." As we stepped outside, Holmes lingered by the flowerbed, his gaze fixed on the disturbed soil. "This troubles me," he said. "Something was here perhaps, a weapon, perhaps evidence. The killer took it, or Carey hid it. Either way, it is a missing piece." The day was waning, the sun sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows. Across the garden, Holmes stood motionless, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. "The sea casts a long shadow," he said at length. "Carey's life was bound to it, and his death is its echo. These initials, JHRM, TCR, men from that world, men who shared his secrets or suffered his wrongs. One of them has struck, and I mean to know which." We made our way back to the Green Man, the weight of the case settling over us. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt sifting through the fragments we had gathered. The harpoon, the notebook, the forced window, the disturbed earth, and now the shadowy figures described by Slater. The cabin, with its nautical relics and blood-stained floor, was a stage set for a drama of vengeance, and I felt the stir of anticipation, knowing that Holmes was already tracing the threads that would lead us to the truth. But as we walked through the quiet village, the sea seemed to loom over us, vast and unyielding, its secrets buried deep, waiting for my friend's relentless mind to unearth them. Chapter 4. The Man at the Gate. The twilight of that sultry August evening draped Forest Row in a soft amber haze. The air still heavy with the day's heat, as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way back from Woodman's Lee to the Green Man. The village was quiet, its lanes empty save for the occasional flicker of a lamp being lit in a cottage window. Holmes, ever restless when a case gripped him, had proposed a detour through the grounds of Captain Carey's estate, his keen eyes scanning the hedgerows and paths for any overlooked clue. The mystery of the Harpoon murder, with its nautical echoes and cryptic notebook, had set his mind ablaze, and I knew from long experience that he would not rest until every thread was traced to its source. As we approached the iron gate of Woodman's Lee, a figure caught my eye. Man standing in the shadow of a yew tree, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of Carey's cabin. He was tall and lean, with a pale face that gleamed faintly in the fading light, and his hands were thrust deep into the pockets of a worn overcoat, ill-suited to the summer warmth. At the sound of our footsteps, he started, his head snapping toward us, and for a moment I thought he might bolt. But Holmes, with that uncanny knack for disarming suspicion, raised a hand in greeting and approached with a casual air. "Good evening, sir," he said, his voice smooth and unthreatening. "A fine night for a stroll, though perhaps an unusual hour to linger by a stranger's gate." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Holmes and me, then to Inspector Hopkins, who trailed a few paces behind. I meant no harm," he stammered, his voice betraying a nervous edge. "I was only passing through." Holmes's smile was thin but reassuring. "No harm at all, I'm sure. Might I have your name, and perhaps your business here? This is the scene of a recent tragedy, as you may know." The man's face tightened, and he seemed to weigh his words carefully. "My name is John Hopley Nelligan," he said at length. "I heard of Captain Carey's death and came to inquire. I have no other business here." Holmes's eyes narrowed, though his expression remained genial. "Nelligan, you say? A name not unfamiliar to me. And your interest in Captain Carey might it stem from a personal connection?" Nelligan's pallor deepened, and he shifted uncomfortably. "My father sailed with Carey years ago, on the Sea Unicorn. He was a banker, John Hopley Sr., but he vanished in 1883 after his firm collapsed. I thought perhaps Carey might have known something of his fate. Holmes exchanged a glance with me, his gaze sharp with interest. The initials J.H. from Carey's notebook flashed through my mind, and I knew Holmes was thinking the same. "A tragic loss, your father," he said, his tone sympathetic but probing. "And you came here, to Forest Row, on the chance that Carey could shed light on it. A long journey for such faint hope." Nelligan's hands clenched in his pockets. "I had no choice. I've searched for answers all my life. When I heard Carey was dead, I thought there might be papers, letters, something to explain what happened." Holmes nodded, as if satisfied, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. "A natural impulse," he said. "Have you visited Woodman's Lee before, Mr. Nelligan?" "No, never," Nelligan replied quickly, too quickly, and his eyes flicked toward the cabin. "I only arrived today." Holmes's smile widened, but there was a glint in his eyes that told me he doubted the man's candor. "Very well," he said. "We shan't detain you. If you learn anything of interest, you may find us at the Green Man. Good evening." Nelligan muttered a farewell and hurried off, his steps uneven as he disappeared down the lane. Holmes watched him go, his expression thoughtful. "That man is no mere passerby, Watson," he said quietly. "He knows more than he tells, and his presence here is no coincidence. J.H. John Hopley." The notebook's first entry: "We have found one of Carey's ghosts." Hopkins, who had remained silent during the exchange, stepped forward. "Do you think him the killer, Mr. Holmes?" He seemed nervous, but hardly the type to wield a harpoon. Holmes shook his head. "Not the killer, perhaps, but a piece of the puzzle. His story of seeking his father's fate rings true, yet there is fear in him, and fear suggests knowledge. We shall keep an eye on Mr. Nelligan." We continued our walk, circling the estate once more before returning to the inn. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt sifting through the implications of Nelligan's appearance. The connection to the sea unicorn and the notebook's cryptic entries was too striking to ignore, and I felt the weight of the case deepening, its roots stretching back to a time when Carey was master of a whaling ship, his life intertwined with men whose names were now inked in blood at the Green Man. We settled in the small parlor where Holmes spread the photographs of Carey's notebook. On the table, the entry for J.H. 1883, £200, stood out, its date aligning with Nelligan's tale of his father's disappearance. If John Hopley Sr. sailed with Carey, Holmes mused, and if his ruin was tied to the sea unicorn, then Carey may have played a role in his downfall. The son seeks answers, but what did he find in that cabin? And why linger here, risking discovery? I ventured a theory. Could Nelligan have confronted Carey, perhaps demanding those answers, and the encounter turned violent? Holmes considered this, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Possible, but unlikely. Nelligan lacks the physicality to throw a harpoon with such force. The killer is a man of strength, a seafarer's build. Nelligan is too slight, too nervous. Yet he may know something of Carey's dealings, something that brought him here at this precise moment. Hopkins, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "I can have the Yard look into Nelligan's background. If his father was a banker, there may be records of his dealings with Carey." "Do so," Holmes said, "and request any logs or crew. Lists from the Sea Unicorn's voyages in 1883 and 1884. The initials RM and TC must be traced. Carey's wealth, his isolation, his murder all stem from that ship. As night fell, Holmes grew restless, pacing the parlor with a cigarette in hand. "The shadow of the sea, Watson," he said at length. "It stretches over this case like a storm cloud. Carris's cabin was his refuge, but also his prison, haunted by the men he wronged. Nelligan is one such ghost, but there are others. We must find them before they vanish into the night." I retired to my room with a sense of unease, the image of Nelligan's pale face lingering in my mind. The gate of Woodman's Lee had become a threshold between past and present, and I knew that Holmes, with his relentless logic, was already closing in on the truth. But what that truth might be, and what further secrets it would unearth, remained hidden in the vast, unyielding depths of Black Peter's past. Chapter 5. The notebook's secrets. The morning following our encounter with John Hopley, Nelligan, at the gate of Woodman's Lee, found Sherlock Holmes in a state of intense concentration, his lean figure hunched over the small table in our room. At the Green Man, the photographs of Captain Peter Carey's notebook, sent by Inspector Hopkins, lay spread before him, their cryptic entries illuminated by the pale light filtering through the inn's narrow window. The air was heavy with the lingering heat of the summer, but Holmes seemed oblivious to the discomfort, his grey eyes fixed on the scrawled initials and sums as if they held the key to some ancient cipher. I, too, felt the weight of the case pressing upon us. The brutal image of Carey's harpoon body and the nervous figure of Nelligan, weaving a tapestry of mystery that grew ever more intricate. Holmes had barely spoken since breakfast, his silence broken only by the occasional murmur as he traced a finger across the photographs. "These are not mere accounts, Watson," he said at length, his voice low and deliberate. "They are a record of transactions, but not of commerce. These sums: £200 to J.H. in 1883, 152 RM in 1884, £102 TC in 1885, suggest payments for silence or complicity. Carey was entangled in something dark, something tied to his days on the Sea Unicorn." I leaned over the table, studying the entries. The handwriting was rough, the ink smudged in places, as if written by a hand unsteady with drink or urgency. "Blackmail, then," I ventured. "Could Carey have been extorting these men?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Or they him. The direction of the money is unclear, but the pattern is not. These are not debts settled or wages paid. They are the price of secrets. And J.H. almost certainly John Hopley Sr. Nelligan's father marks the beginning of the trail. His disappearance in 1883 aligns with this first entry. We must uncover what happened aboard that ship." Our plan for the day was to return to London, where Holmes intended to consult maritime records and pursue inquiries into the Sea Unicorn's voyages. Before departing Forest Row, however, he insisted on one final visit to Woodman's Lee to ensure no detail had been overlooked. The train would not leave for an hour, and Holmes, ever thorough, wished to re-examine the disturbed flowerbed that had so intrigued him. We arrived at the estate under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, the air thick with the scent of dust and wilting roses. The cabin stood as we had left it, its weathered planks silent witnesses to the violence within. The constable on duty, a young man with a serious demeanor, reported no visitors since our last inspection. Holmes nodded absently, his attention already on the flower bed near the cabin's window. He knelt, his magnifying glass sweeping over the trampled soil, which remained loose and uneven, as if something had been buried or unearthed. "This patch troubles me, Watson," he said, probing with a stick. The disturbance is deliberate, yet no object remains. The killer, or perhaps Carey himself, hid something here, evidence, perhaps, or a weapon. But it is gone now, and that absence is as telling as any presence. He rose, brushing the dirt from his hands, and circled the cabin once more, his eyes scanning the ground for any new trace. The snapped hedge branch we had noted the previous day caught his attention again, and he paused to examine it. This was no casual passer-by, he said. The break is fresh, and the scuff marks suggest a man in haste. Our killer may have lingered longer than we thought. Inside the cabin, Holmes made a final survey, his gaze lingering on the harpoons mounted on the wall. 5 remain, he murmured. The 6th ended Carey's life. The choice of weapon is no accident. It is a seafarer's signature, a message from his past. He picked up the tobacco pouch, sniffing its contents again, and then turned to the rum bottle, tilting it to gauge its level. Still half full, he said. Carey drank, but not alone, I think. The killer may have shared a glass before the deed. We left the cabin and made our way to the station, the weight of the case settling over us. On the train to London, Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt racing through the possibilities. I, too, pondered the clues we had gathered. The harpoon, the forced window, the disturbed earth, and now the notebook's cryptic entries, with Nelligan's sudden appearance adding a new layer of intrigue. The initials J.H. pointed to his father. But who were R, M, and T.C.? And what had Carey done to invite such a brutal reckoning? Back at Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time. He dispatched a telegram to Hopkins, requesting any available records of the Sea Unicorn's crew and voyages, particularly for the years 1883 to 1885. Then, with a map of London's docks spread before him, he began cross-referencing the notebook's entries with maritime archives he kept in a battered tin box. The Sea Unicorn sailed from Dundee, he said, but its crew would have passed through London often. These initials are likely men who served under Carey, or who crossed his path in some darker capacity. He pulled a volume of shipping records from the shelf, its pages yellowed and dogged. John Hopley Sr., he said, scanning the lists. A banker, Nelligan said, but sailing on a whaler is curious for such a man. Here 1883, the Sea Unicorn's log mentions a passenger. J. Hopley embarked for a voyage to the Arctic. No rank or role, which is unusual. Passengers on whalers are rare, unless they have business with the captain. I frowned. Business. Could Carey have been involved in Hopley's financial ruin? Holmes nodded. It is possible. Hopley's firm collapsed in 1883, amid rumors of fraud. If he sailed with Carey, it may have been to secure funds or settle a debt. The £200 in the notebook suggests a transaction, but whether Hopley paid Carey or Carey paid Hopley, we cannot yet say. He turned to the other initials. RM and TC are less clear. The Sea Unicorn's crew lists are incomplete, but I have a contact at the Dundee shipping office who may provide more. For now, we assume they are men from Carey's past sailors, perhaps, or others caught in his web. The afternoon brought a response from Hopkins, a package of documents, including partial crew lists from the Sea Unicorn and a report on John Hopley Sr.'s disappearance. The banker had indeed sailed with Carey in 1883, ostensibly to inspect investments in the whaling trade. His firm's collapse followed soon after, and he was last seen boarding a train for London, never to reach his destination. The report hinted at scandal, missing funds, angry investors, but no direct link to Carey. Holmes read the documents with a fierce intensity, his fingers tracing the lines. Hopley's voyage was no coincidence, he said. Carey was no ordinary captain. His wealth, his isolation, these payments all point to a man who profited from more than whale oil. Fraud, extortion, perhaps even violence at sea. And one of these, men JHRM or TC, brought his reckoning. As evening fell, Holmes lit a pipe, the smoke curling around him like a fog. Nelligan's appearance is the first crack in the case, he said. He seeks his father's fate, but he fears something more. Did he find evidence in Carey's cabin? Did he know of the notebook? We must watch him, Watson, and we must find RM and TC. The sea's shadow is long, and its secrets are buried deep, but I mean to drag them into the light. I retired that night with a sense of the case's deepening complexity. The notebook, with its terse entries, was a map to Carey's past, each initial a name, each sum a sin. Nelligan's nervous presence at the gate, the disturbed flowerbed, the Harpoon's cruel, precisional, were threads in a web that Holmes was beginning to unravel. But as I drifted to sleep, the image of Black Peter's cabin, with its relics, of the sea and its blood-stained floor, lingered in my mind. A reminder that the truth, when it came, would be as relentless as the tides. Chapter 6. The sailor's tale the morning after our return to Baker Street brought a fresh urgency to the investigation, as if the very air of London carried the temps of the sea and the weight of Captain Peter Carey's violent end. Sherlock Holmes was up before dawn, his lean figure silhouetted against the window as he pored over the documents from Inspector Hopkins. The crew lists of the Sea Unicorn spread across the table like a chart of uncharted waters. The notebooks, cryptic entries, JHRMT, C had become his lodestar, and the encounter with John Hopley Nelligan at the gate of Woodman's Lee had only sharpened his resolve. I found him already dressed, his eyes bright with the restless energy that seized him when a case neared a critical turn. "Watson," he said, looking up as I entered, "we are closing in on the heart of this matter. The initials in Carey's notebook are not mere names, they are men bound to him by a shared past, and one of them has struck with a harpoon's precision. Today we seek RM, and I have a lead." He held up a telegram, its edges crumpled from his grip. "Hopkins has done well. A sailor named Patrick Cairns, a former harpooner on the Sea Unicorn, was seen in Forest Row the night of Carey's death. His initials do not match RM, but his presence is no coincidence. He is in London now, at a tavern in Deptford. We shall pay him a visit." The prospect of confronting a man who might hold the key to the murder sent a thrill through me, and within the hour we were aboard a cab rattling through the bustling streets toward the docks. Deptford, with its maze of wharves and warehouses, was a world apart from the quiet lanes of Forest Row. The air was thick with the smells of tar, fish, and coal smoke, and the cries of gulls mingled with the shouts of dock workers. The tavern, a low, smoke-stained building called the Anchor and Crown, crouched near the river, its windows dim with grime. Inside, the air was heavy with the reek of stale beer and tobacco, and a motley crowd of sailors and labourers filled the room. Holmes, with his uncanny ability to blend into any setting, led us to a corner table, his eyes scanning the faces. "Cairns is here," he murmured, nodding toward a hulking figure at the bar. The man was a giant, broad-shouldered and barrel, with hands scarred from years of hauling lines and wielding harpoons. His face, weathered by sun and wind, bore a jagged scar across one cheek, and his eyes, small and sharp, darted warily as he drank. Holmes approached with the ease of an old acquaintance, ordering a round of ale to set the man at ease. "Patrick Cairns, I presume," he said, sliding a glass across the bar. "I've heard you were a harpooner on the Sea Unicorn under Captain Peter Carey." Cairns's hand tightened around his glass, but he nodded, his voice a low growl. "Aye, that's me. What's it to you?" Holmes's smile was disarming, but his eyes were keen as a blade. "A matter of curiosity. Carey's death has stirred some talk, and I'm told you were in Forest Row the night he met his end." Cairns's expression darkened, and he took a long pull from his glass. "I was there, right enough. Had business with the old devil. He owed me money from a voyage in '80 for my share of a haul he cheated me out of. I went to collect, but I didn't kill him." Holmes leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "A harpoon through the chest is no common murder, Mr. Cairns. It's a seafarer's work, and you're a man who knows the craft. Tell me what happened that night." Cairns's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he might refuse to speak. But the weight of Holmes's gaze, calm yet unrelenting, seemed to compel him. "I went to his cabin," he said at last. "Late, after dark. The door was unlocked, so I went in. Carey was there, half drunk, sitting at his table with that damned rum bottle. I told him I wanted my money, £150, what he owed me from a cargo we took in the Arctic. He laughed, called me a fool, said I'd never see a penny. We argued, and he swung at me. I pushed him back, and he fell against the chair, broke it, I reckon, but I didn't touch no harpoon. I left him alive, cursing me from his floor." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly on the bar. "And the window, forced, they say. Did you enter that way?" Cairns shook his head. "No need. Like I said, the door was open. I don't know about no window." Holmes studied him, his eyes searching for the flicker of a lie. "And this debt, £150, you say? Curious that it matches an entry in Carey's notebook, RM 1884. Would that be you?" Cairns's face twitched, a flash of surprise betraying him. "I don't know nothing about no notebook. My name's Cairns, not RM. He owed me, that's all." Holmes nodded, as if satisfied, but I could see the calculation in his gaze. "Very well, Mr. Cairns. If you recall anything more, you'll find me through Inspector Hopkins at Scotland Yard." We left the tavern, the din of the docks swallowing our footsteps. Holmes was silent as we walked, his mind no doubt dissecting Cairns's tale. "He is our man, Watson," he said at length, his voice low, or close to it. "His strength, his skill with a harpoon, his presence in Forest Row point to him. Yet his denial is firm, and the initials do not align. RM remains a shadow, but Cairns knows more than he admits." I frowned. If not RM, then who? And why lie about the notebook? Holmes's eyes gleamed. He may not know of the notebook, or he may fear what it reveals. His story of a debt from 1884 fits the pattern of Carey's entries, but the initials suggest another player. We need the Sea Unicorn's logs to confirm his tail end, to find RM. Back at Baker Street, a package awaited us from Hopkins, a partial log from the Sea Unicorn's 1884 voyage, listing Patrick Cairns as harpooner. The log noted a dispute over cargo shares, with Carey accused of withholding profits, but no mention of RM or any other initials from the notebook. Holmes read the pages with fierce concentration, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. Cairns spoke truth about the debt, he said, but his presence at the cabin is too convenient. The broken chair, the forced window, his story accounts for some, but not all. And the harpoons, though only a man like Cairns could manage it. He rose, pacing the room. "We are close, Watson, but the net is not yet tight. Cairns is a link, but not the whole chain. Nelligan, Cairns, the notebook's names, they are bound to carry us past, to the sea unicorn's voyages. We must find RM, and we must return to that flowerbed. Something was taken from it, something that ties this all together." As night fell, Holmes sat by the fire, his violin in hand, drawing slow, mournful notes from the strings. The sailor's tale had brought us closer to the truth, but the shadow of the sea still loomed, its depths hiding the final piece of the puzzle. I knew Holmes would not rest until he had dragged it into the light, and I felt the familiar stir of anticipation, sensing that the case was nearing its climax. Chapter 7. The Trap is Sether. Dim glow of gas lamps flickered in the streets of London as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in our Baker Street lodgings, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and the faint crackle of the fire. It was the evening following our encounter with Patrick Cairns, the burly harpooner whose scarred hands and evasive answers had only deepened the mystery of Captain Peter Carey's murder. Holmes had been restless since our return from Deptford, pacing the room with a nervous energy that betrayed the intensity of his focus. The photographs of Carey's notebook lay scattered across the table, their cryptic entries, JHRMT, taunting us with their secrets. The encounter with John Hopley Nelligan at the gate of Woodman's Lee and Cairns's tale of a disputed debt had drawn us closer to the truth. But Holmes was not one to rest on partial answers. He sought the whole weave of the tapestry, and I could sense that he was preparing to tighten the net. "Watson," he said at length, pausing by the window to gaze out at the fog creeping through the street. "We have to thread Snelligan and Cairns, but the pattern is incomplete. Cairns has the strength and skill to wield a harpoon, and his presence in Forest Row is damning, yet his denial rings with a certain truth. Nelligan, meanwhile, is driven by a son's quest for his father's fate, but his fear suggests he knows more than he admits. We must bring them together, force their hands, and see what truths spill out." I looked up from my armchair, intrigued. "You mean to confront them?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of calculation. "Not merely confront Watson and Snare. We shall return to Forest Row and stage a scene at the cabin. If our killer believes his secret is at risk, he may reveal himself, and if Nelligan holds evidence, we shall draw it from him." He turned to the table, scribbling a note with swift, precise strokes. "I shall wire Hopkins to summon both Nelligan and Cairns to Woodman's Lead tomorrow night, under the pretense of new evidence found in the cabin. We shall be there, hidden, to observe their reactions. A man cornered will often betray himself." The plan was bold, even for Holmes, but I had seen his traps yield results before. "And if neither is the killer?" I asked. "Then we shall learn something all the same," he replied, sealing the note. The notebook's initials, M and TC, remain elusive, but Cairns and Nelligan are tied to Carey's past. One of them, or someone they know, drove that harpoon. We shall set the stage and let the drama unfold. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Holmes dispatched his telegram to Hopkins, who replied promptly, confirming that Nelligan and Cairns had been located and would be brought to the cabin under the guise of a police inquiry. We took the evening train to Forest Row, the countryside, cloaked in a gathering dusk that mirrored the tension in our purpose. Holmes was silent during the journey, his sharp features set in concentration, his fingers occasionally tapping out a rhythm on the armrest. I, too, felt the weight of anticipation. The image of Carey's bloodied form and the harpoon's cruel precision vivid in my mind. We arrived at Woodman's Lee under a sky heavy with clouds, the air cool and damp with the threat of rain. The cabin stood as we had left it, its weathered planks dark against the fading light, a silent monument to the violence within. Hopkins met us at the gate, his face pale but resolute. "I've done as you asked, Mr. Holmes," he said. "Nelligan is staying at the Green Man, and Cairns was found at a boarding house in Lewisham. They'll be here within the hour, separately, as you instructed." Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the grounds. "Good. We shall conceal ourselves in the shrubbery near the cabin. Watson, bring your revolver. We may need it." We took our positions behind a dense thicket of laurels, the leaves damp against our coats. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of wind or the distant hoot of an owl. Holmes crouched beside me, his gaze fixed on the cabin's door, his body taut as a bowstring. I clutched my revolver, its weight reassuring, though I hoped it would not be needed. The first to arrive was Nelligan, his tall, slight figure moving hesitantly along the path. He carried a small satchel, clutched tightly to his chest, and his pale face was drawn with anxiety. He glanced about, as if sensing eyes upon him, before pushing open the cabin door and stepping inside. Through the window, we saw him light a lamp, its glow casting shadows across the room. He stood by the table, his hands trembling as he opened the satchel and withdrew a sheaf of papers, spreading them out as if searching for something. Holmes's whisper was barely audible. "He's looking for evidence, perhaps the same papers he sought before. Note his fear, Watson. He expects discovery." Minutes later, heavy footsteps announced Cairns's arrival. The harpooner's massive frame filled the doorway, his scarred face grim as he entered without knocking. Nelligan started, nearly dropping his papers, and the two men faced each other, the tension palpable even from our hiding place. "What are you doing here?" Cairns growled, his voice carrying through the still night. "This ain't your place." Nelligan's voice was high, strained. "I could ask you the same, Cairns. I know you were here that night. What did you do to Carey?" Cairns took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Don't you accuse me, lad. I came for my money, nothing more. But you're sniffing around for something. What's in them papers?" Nelligan clutched the satchel, his eyes wide. "My father's name was in his book. Carey ruined him, cheated him, and I found proof. You were on that ship, Cairns. You know what happened in '83? Cairns's face darkened, and he lunged forward, seizing Nelligan by the collar. "You don't know nathan, boy. Keep your nose out, or you'll end like Carey." Holmes signaled, and we burst from the shrubbery, Hopkins close behind. I raised my revolver as we stormed the cabin, and Holmes's voice cut through the scuffle. Like a blade. "Enough, Cairns." "Release him." Cairns froze, his grip loosening, and Nelligan stumbled back, clutching his papers. Holmes stepped forward, his revolver steady, his eyes cold and commanding. "Explain yourselves," he said. "What do you know of Carey's death?" Nelligan was the first to speak, his voice shaking. "I found papers in the cabin letters, accounts proving Carey swindled my father on the Sea Unicorn. He took money meant for investors, drove my father to ruin. I came to confront him, but he attacked me. I fled, but I swear I didn't kill him." Cairns sneered, his massive hands still balled into fists. "I told you, I went for my money. Carey was alive when I left. I don't know who stuck him, but it wasn't me. Holmes's gaze flickered between them, his mind racing. The papers. Mr. Nelligan, show me. Nelligan hesitated, then handed over the satchel. Holmes rifled through it, pulling out a bundle of letters and ledgers. They detailed transactions from 1883, implicating Carey in a scheme to divert profits from the sea. Unicorn's cargo, with John Hopley Sr. as an unwitting partner. This confirms Carey's fraud, Holmes said, but not his murder. Cairns, your story holds for now. But the Harpoon was no accident. Someone with your skill struck that blow. Kearns's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Holmes turned. To Hopkins, take them both into custody for questioning. We have more to learn. As we left the cabin, the night seemed darker, the air heavier with the weight of secrets half revealed. Holmes's trap had worked, drawing out truths from both men, but the killer's identity remained just out of reach. The sea's shadow loomed larger, and I knew that Holmes would not rest until the final thread was pulled. Chapter 8. The Harpoon's truth. The night air was thick with the scent of impending rain as we left the cabin at Woodman's Lee. The drama of Sherlock Holmes's carefully laid trap still echoing in my mind. The confrontation between John Hopley, Nelligan, and Patrick Cairns had peeled back layers of the mystery surrounding Captain Peter Carey's murder. Yet the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his sharp features set with a determination that I knew signaled the nearing climax of our investigation. The papers Nelligan had produced letters and ledgers, implicating Carey in a fraudulent scheme aboard the Sea Unicorn, had confirmed the captain's dark dealings. But the Harpoon's brutal signature pointed to a deeper, more personal vendetta. As we escorted Nelligan and Cairns to the Green Man under Inspector Hopkins's watchful eye, I sensed that Holmes was poised to unravel the final knot in this seafaring tragedy. Back at the inn, Holmes wasted no time. He spread Nelligan's papers across the parlor table, his long fingers sifting through the faded documents with the precision of a surgeon. The letters, written in a hurried scrawl, detailed a scheme from 1883 in which Carey had diverted profits from a whaling voyage, falsifying cargo records to enrich himself while leaving investors, including John Hopley Sr., ruined. The ledgers corroborated the notebook's entries, with sums paid to J.H. and others, suggesting a network of complicity or coercion. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he read, his mind weaving connections that I could only dimly perceive. These papers are damning, Watson, he said, his voice low but vibrant with excitement. Carey was no mere weigher. He was a predator, preying on the trust of men like Hopley. But the Harpoon, its choice, is what troubles me. It is not enough that Carey was a swindler. His death was personal, a reckoning delivered with a skill. I glanced at Nelligan, who sat pale and trembling in a corner, his hands clutching the satchel as if it were a lifeline. Cairns, by contrast, lounged against the wall, his massive frame relaxed but his eyes wary, like those of a caged beast. Hopkins stood guard, his expression a mix of anticipation and unease, awaiting Holmes's next move. Mr. Nelligan, Holmes said, turning to the young man with a tone both gentle and commanding. You have shown us Carey's fraud, but you have not told us all. You were in the cabin before the murder, you say. What did you find there, beyond these papers? And why return to Woodman's Lee? Nelligan's lips quivered, and he seemed to shrink under Holmes's gaze. I have found the notebook, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It was on the table, open. I saw my father's initials, the sums paid to him. I knew then that Carey had destroyed him, driven him to vanish. I took the papers from a locked drawer in the cabin, thinking they might prove his guilt. But when I confronted Carey, he was drunk, raging. He lunged at me, and I ran. I swear I didn't kill him. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And the flowerbed, the disturbed earth we found, did you dig there? Nelligan shook his head vehemently. No, I never touched it. I only went inside the cabin. Holmes turned to Cairns, his gaze like a blade. And you, Mr. Cairns. You claim you argued with Carey, broke a chair, and left him alive. Yet the harpoon's throw required a harpooner's arm, your arm, perhaps. What else did you see that night? Cairns's scarred face hardened, but he met Holmes's stare without flinching. I told you, I went for my money. Carey was a cheat, kept my share from 84. We fought, but I didn't touch his damned harpoons. Someone else got to him after I left. Holmes paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind racing. The harpoon's angle, he said, almost to himself, suggests a throw from the doorway, a distance of some 10 feet. The force was immense, the aim precise. Only a man trained in the weigher's craft could manage it. He stopped, his eyes flicking to Cairns. You have the strength, the skill, and you were there. Cairns's fists clenched. But before he could respond, Holmes turned to Hopkins. Inspector, take me back to the cabin. I must test a theory. We returned to Woodman's Lee under a sky now spitting rain, the night dark and heavy. The cabin's interior was as grim as ever, the blood-stained floor a stark reminder of the crime. Holmes moved with purpose, taking one of the remaining harpoons from the wall and weighing it in his hands. Heavy, balanced for throwing, he said. A weapon for a man like Cairns. He positioned himself at the doorway, measuring the distance to where Carey's body had lain. The angle of the wound suggests a throw from here, he said, raising the harpoon as if to test its trajectory. He did not throw it, but his eyes traced the path, calculating force and arc. The killer stood precisely here, Watson. The height, the power, it fits Cairns's build perfectly. Returning to the Green Man, Holmes confronted Cairns's once more. Your story has gaps, Mr. Cairns, he said, his voice cold and unyielding. You were in the cabin, you admit. You fought with Carey, broke a chair. The harpoon was taken from the wall, thrown with a skill you possess. Deny it if you will, but the facts accuse you. Cairns's face twisted, and for a moment I thought he might strike out. But then his shoulders slumped, and his voice, when it came, was a low, bitter growl. All right, damn you, it was me. Carey cheated me out of my share in 84, kept me poor while he lived fat. I went to get what was mine. He laughed, mocked me, said I'd never see a shilling. I saw the harpoon on the wall, and something snapped. I took it, threw it, and he was done. I didn't mean to kill him, not at first, but he pushed me too far. Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. And the flowerbed, what did you hide? There. Cairns shook his head. Nothing. I didn't touch no flowerbed. I left through the door, same as I came. Holmes turned to Nelligan. And you, sir, you took the papers, but nothing else. Nelligan nodded, his face ashen. Only the papers. I swear it. Hopkins stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. Patrick Cairns, you're under arrest for the murder of Peter Carey, Mr. Nelligan. You'll face charges for concealing evidence, pending further inquiry. As Cairns was led away, Holmes stood silent, his gaze distant. The Harpoon has spoken, Watson, he said at length. Cairns is our man, driven by a grudge nursed over years. Yet the flowerbed nags at me. Something was there, and its absence is a shadow on this case. We returned to Baker Street the next morning, the rain now a steady drizzle, mirroring the somber mood of our victory. Cairns's confession had closed the case, but Holmes's unease lingered, a reminder that even his relentless logic could not banish every mystery. Nelligan, cleared of murder, would answer for his actions. But the notebook's other initials are M and T, remained unresolved, ghosts of Carey's past that might never fully emerge. The Harpoon's truth had been revealed, but the sea, as ever, kept its deeper secrets. Chapter 9. The Final Thread. The rain that had begun as a drizzle during our night at Woodman's Lee had settled into a steady patter by the time Sherlock Holmes and I returned to Baker Street. The grey curtain of London's weather mirroring the sombre resolution of Captain Peter Carey's murder. Patrick Cairns's confession had brought the case to a close. His admission of driving the Harpoon through Carey's chest, a grim testament to a grudge nursed over a decade. Yet, as we sat in our familiar lodgings, the fire crackling against the damp chill of the evening, I could see that Holmes was not entirely at ease. The notebook's cryptic entries, the disturbed flowerbed, and the lingering shadows of initials like RM and TC gnawed at him. Unresolved threads in a tapestry he had woven with his usual precision. I knew from long experience that my friend's mind would not rest until every detail was accounted for, even in a case so nearly concluded. Holmes sat by the fire, his violin resting idly on his knee, his sharp features etched with a quiet intensity. The photographs of Carey's notebook lay on the table, alongside Nelligan's papers, which had revealed the captain's fraudulent dealings aboard the Sea Unicorn. Cairns's confession fits the facts, Watson, he said at length, his voice low and thoughtful. His strength, his skill as a harpooner, his motive rooted in a cheated share from 1884 all align with the evidence. The broken chair, the forced window, the Harpoon's deadly arcades story accounts for them. Yet that flowerbed troubles me. Something was buried there, or taken, and Cairns denies any knowledge of it. I leaned forward, warming my hands by the fire. Could it have been Nelligan then? He admitted to searching the cabin. Perhaps he hid something outside. Holmes shook his head. Nelligan's fear was genuine, his focus on the papers absolute. He sought proof of his father's ruin, not to conceal evidence. No, the flowerbed points to another hand, perhaps Carey himself, or someone yet unknown. He rose, pacing the room with that restless energy that signaled an unfinished puzzle. The notebook's other initials are M&T, CR men we have not found. They are tied to Carey's past, to the Sea Unicorn's voyages, and I suspect they hold the key to that disturbed earth. Cairns killed Carey, but the full scope of his crimes remains hidden. The next morning, Holmes dispatched a telegram to Inspector Hopkins, requesting any further records of the Sea Unicorn's crew, particularly for the years 1884 and 1885, when the notebook's entries for RM and TC were made. He also asked for a report on any unusual activity at Woodman's Lee in the days following the murder. If something was taken from that flowerbed, he said, it may have been retrieved after Cairns's departure. We must know who else visited the estate. While awaiting Hopkins's reply, Holmes turned his attention to the maritime archives. he kept in a battered tin box, their pages filled with notes on ships and sailors gleaned from years of inquiries. He cross-referenced the initials RM and TC with the partial crew lists from the Sea Unicorn, his fingers moving swiftly through the documents. RM, he murmured. Possibly Robert Murdoch, a mate on the 1884 voyage, noted for insubordination. TC is less clear, perhaps Thomas Carver, a boatswain in 1885, though the records are incomplete. Both men served under Carey, and both had cause to resent him, if the logs are to be believed. I frowned, recalling Cairns's tale of a cheated share. Could they have been part of the same scheme? Men Carey swindled, like Cairns. Holmes nodded, likely. The notebook suggests payments, perhaps to buy silence or complicity in Carey's frauds. If Murdoch or Carver received such sums, they may have known of Carey's dealings with Hopley Sr. and others. One of them may have visited the cabin, either before or after the murder, to retrieve something incriminating. A telegram from Hopkins arrived that afternoon, bringing news that tightened the thread. A villager had reported seeing a man near Woodman's Lee 2 nights after Carey's death, a figure described as short and wiry, with a sailor's gait, lingering by the cabin before vanishing into the dark. The description did not match Cairns's hulking frame or Nelligan's slight build, suggesting a third player. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he read the message. "This is our man, Watson." Someone returned to the flowerbed, perhaps to recover what was hidden there. Determined to pursue this lead, Holmes proposed a final visit to Forest Row. "We shall search the grounds once more," he said, "and I shall request Hopkins to trace Robert Murdoch and Thomas Carver, if either is in London. We may yet catch them." We arrived at Woodman's Lee under a clearing sky, the rain having left the ground soft and treacherous. Holmes made straight for the flowerbed, his magnifying glass in hand, his movements precise despite the mud. The soil, still loose from the earlier disturbance, bore faint traces of new, mark-shallow indentations, as if something had been dug. "Up in haste, here," Holmes said, pointing to a patch where the earth was slightly mounded. This was disturbed again after Cairns's arrest. Someone came back. He knelt, digging carefully with a small trowel he had brought. After a few moments, his efforts uncovered a small, oilcloth-wrapped bundle, buried no more than a foot deep. Holmes unwrapped it with care, revealing a thin ledger, its pages damp but legible. The entries mirrored those in Carey's notebook, but with greater detail, names, dates, and sums tied to the Sea Unicorn's voyages, including payments to Robert Murdoch and Thomas Carver. One entry stood out, a note from 1884, describing a share withheld from Murdoch, with a sum of £150, matching the notebook's record. "This is what the killer feared," Holmes said, his voice triumphant. Carey kept a second ledger, hidden in the flowerbed, perhaps as insurance against his confederates. Murdoch, or someone acting for him, returned to retrieve it. Back at the Green Man, Holmes wired Hopkins with instructions to locate Murdoch and Carver, providing descriptions from the Sea Unicorn's logs. The reply came swiftly. Murdoch, a former mate, was living in a sailor's boarding house in Poplar, while Carver's whereabouts were unknown. Holmes's plan was immediate. "We shall visit Murdoch tonight," he said. "If he is our man, he will not expect us." The boarding house in Poplar was a grim, smoke-stained building near the docks, its halls filled with the clamour of sailors and the reek of cheap gin. Robert Murdoch was a wiry, grey-haired man with a sailor's stoop, his eyes sharp and suspicious. As Holmes introduced himself, under questioning, he admitted knowing Carey but denied visiting Forest Row, "I ain't seen the captain in years," he growled. "He cheated me, but I had no part in his death." Holmes produced the ledger, watching Murdoch's face closely. The man's eyes widened, a flicker of fear betraying him. "That's Carys," he admitted. "He kept records of his dirty work. I took my share in '84 to keep quiet about his swindles, but I never went near his cabin." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "Someone did, Mr. Murdoch. Someone dug up this ledger 2 nights ago. If not you, then who?" Murdoch's shoulders sagged. "Likely Carver. He was always bitter, said Carey owed him more than he paid. I heard he was in London last week, asking about Carey." Holmes nodded, satisfied. "We shall find Mr. Carver. For now, you will accompany Inspector Hopkins to answer further questions." As we left Poplar, the final thread of the case seemed to tighten. Cairns had killed Carey, driven by his own grievance. But the ledger's retrieval pointed to Carver, a shadow from the same dark past. Hopkins later confirmed that Carver was apprehended in Gravesend, admitting to digging up the ledger to destroy. Evidence of his own complicity in Carey's schemes. He had not killed Carey but feared exposure. Back at Baker Street, Holmes sat by the fire, his violin now silent. "Carey's greed wove his fate, Watson," he said. "He cheated men like Cairns, Murdoch, and Carver, and one struck back with a harpoon's vengeance. The ledger was the final thread, tying his crimes to his death. The sea, as ever, holds its grudges long." I nodded, the weight of the case lifting at last. Black Peter's shadow had faded, but its echo lingered, a reminder of the relentless tide of justice that Holmes, with his unerring logic, had brought to bear. The end.